Hey there, welcome to Synth Seeker. My name's Luke. Today is an experiment, kind of a vlog. We're going to be talking about more mechanical things like studio routing, MIDI routing, and opinionated things like why I think certain synths suck, hopefully with laughs rather than tears. We'll look at where the MIDI flows from and to, how the audio flows, and why I am the laziest synth nerd around. There's going to be a studio quiz mixed into all of that. No, not a tour, a quiz. Everyone does studio tours. I'm going to show you close-up photos of the filter knobs and output jacks from some of my synths, and you can try and figure out what synth it's from. They will be black and white photos because sometimes color's a dead giveaway. Leave your answer in the comments, and you may win the prestigious award of Pedantic Synthesist Prime, and there may be a plaque involved, but I don't know. We'll find out. Perhaps a Discord role on some future date. All right. We use the word studio. My studio, finger quotes implied, fits on a single desk, hello IKEA, and a 2-tier synth stand. All right, we're not talking room-size studio. I suspect most of the synths purchased in the majority of homes around the world fit into a dedicated space somewhere near a bed. Here's a diagram. Basically, my studio revolves around what I call the ever-shifting synth herd. It's a Heisenberg-like cloud of synthesizer probabilities. All right, gas is a thing, new things come in, old things go out. So, starts with the human. I've got some little grid or keyboard. That's plugged into the MIDI routing system. That's a 19-inch rack sitting on my desk that has splitters, mergers, MIDI processors, MIDI power conduits, things like that. The MIDI spec, I think it says that MIDI needs to provide power or that it may provide power if it chooses to. Well, not all synths provide enough or even any power on some of those occasions. I use this little box from MIDI Solutions that puts power onto the MIDI bus, and I put it at the beginning of my chain, right? So my control surface or whatever it is, I plug a MIDI cable from there into this little box and then run this little box, a cable from there into my sort of overall MIDI routing rack. And it makes sure that there's power for every device on the system. And it only adds, I think, like 10 microseconds of latency. Okay, so I'd need 100 of them queued up in a daisy chain before I even got 1 millisecond of latency. Okay, so don't worry about that. This is a useful little tool if you ever experience problems with not enough power being delivered, or if you just don't want to worry about it. Stick one of these suckers at the front of your chain and you're good to go. All right. So the synth herd consumes MIDI. I wire that stuff up once and then never touch it again. And then the herd of synthesizers generates audio. That audio flows out into the audio routing system, which is another little 19-inch rack sitting on top of my desk. There's a link in the description of where these are. Not affiliate links. I'm not getting kickbacks for this stuff. But it's a 12U rack. You can find something like it or go to IKEA or build your own, right? Some people really fixate on furniture. Like, why do so many synthesists also do woodworking, right? It's because they're building so much furniture for their synth gear. That may be it. But audio flows out of the synth herd into the routing system. And that's basically a collection of patch bays. And hardware effects, like guitar pedals, things like that, are very common in there. They work into the patch bay. And then a mixer. Some people like a physical mixer, like a desk, you know. I don't have the space for that. I use a virtual mixer. I've got a couple interfaces that have grown up over time. I started with one, then I got another one, then another one. And they're all networked together, and they provide a virtual mixer for my system. And I control it either from a computer or my phone or an iPad over the network. There's no cable there. That works well for me, okay? And I've got configurations saved like presets. So if I want to route the mixer where I'm using a bunch of monophonic synths and I want everything on mono channels, that's fine. If I want to flip it over to using a bunch of stereo synths and I need to reconfigure the mixer into stereo bus mode so that what's coming in are, summed nice, not summed, but placed together as left and right and panned appropriately, that's just a preset on the mixer. That works for me, okay? The audio routing system, eventually, as it flows downstream, sends a feed out to my audio capture devices, okay? And there can be more than one. but it could be a handheld recorder, or I'm recording into a computer, or I'm feeding the monitors or my headphones, or I'm feeding a stream, something like that. And I want those to be interchangeable. And when I change from a handheld to like a laptop, or from listening on headphones to listening on headphones and feeding a stream, I don't want to have to touch any of the cabling that's in the system, right? So that's what that virtual mixer is for. It's that simple. I can leave those things connected, or leave a cable conveniently placed at the front of the desk to plug into a handheld recorder. If someone brings a piece of gear over, I do not have to climb behind the desk to get to that stuff. It just sits up on the top. We patch it in with a patch bay. We're good to go. Okay. So that's the studio config. Let's move on to the quiz and some unpopular opinions. Shall we? All right. I have made all these black and white, so they're leached all the color out of these photos because sometimes it's a dead giveaway. But let's take a look at some synths here. These are not all the synths I have. Again, it's a sort of it is a probabilistic cloud. Is that a real word? I don't know. Heisenberg uncertainty principle, sort of like cloud. The cat in the box. If the box is closed, we don't know if the cat's alive or dead. I don't know if the synths are existing here or not until I touch them and use them. So here's synth 1. Here is the filter and the output jacks on it. What do you think that is? Tell me in the comments. Here's an unpopular opinion. The Moog 1 synthesizer. I am not a fan. I owned one for a year, a little over a year. I loved it and hated it. And eventually the hate outweighed the love. Here's some sacrilege. What I want is the Moog 1 synthesizer. Okay, I love the synth, but I want it with digital oscillators. It could even be a completely digital signal path. I'm not that concerned about digital versus analog. That's a different unpopular opinion. We'll get to that. But the Moog 1 synth, I sold it because it wouldn't stay in frickin' tune. And I'm not talking about, the warm analog drift of analog oscillators. I'm talking the bitch wouldn't stay in tune. I had 2 voice cards in the 16 voice card collection that just would not stay in tune. Drove me batty. Went through a bunch of firmware updates, things like that. And I understand that's the sort of beast that you have to play to its strengths, not try and make it conform to what necessarily you want. But I have a ton of respect for the Moog company, and I own a bunch of Moog synths. But the Moog 1 had to go. It's a malfunction I have. You gotta fucking stay in tune. At least, I don't mind 5 cents a drift, 10 cents a drift, right? But, a semitone of drift on one voice, no, I'm sorry. And it just weighs too much to ship back and forth. So off it went. There's unpopular opinion number 1. And we can talk more about that at a future date. Let's look at the next synth, okay? So synth number 2, here's a shot of the filter knob and its output jack. Put in the comments, what do you think synth number 2 is? You can figure this out with a little research online, but this was fun. Let's see. Unpopular opinion number 1. Let's continue in the Moog thing. I just watched a great video from Jorb. His link is in the description. He did a sort of self-test of, is there a Moog sound? I listened to 6 synths in random order, blindfolded, and tried to pick out the Moog synths. And all he was listening to was a sawtooth wave going through filter sweeps with varying increments of resonance on the filter. I'm not going to spoil it. Go watch his video. Very entertaining video. Interesting conclusion there. Nothing earth-shattering, right? But definitely fun. So unpopular opinion number 2. Do I think the Moog sound is some special holy thing? No, I don't. Do I think Moogs have a distinct sound? Yes, 100%. Do I think that they're awesome? Yeah, I really like Moog synths. The funny thing is, out of all the synths I have, the Moog synths have the highest output. just like literally the amount of power flowing out of the audio jack is like 10 decibels, 12 decibels higher than every other synth I have. I always have to trim the Moog synths down in the mixer. So maybe that's the Moog sound. The Moog sound is the sound of overdriven preamps. So I'm not sure. But it does exist. I do like it. Do I think there's a difference between a Moog, real Moog, and a clone? I don't. I don't think there's that much of a difference. I haven't heard it, and I don't care, honestly. If you want a Behringer Moog, whatever. If you want a Behringer one, fine, go for that. Like Moogs, the software versions of like the Mini Moog, to my ears, they sound close enough. And especially like in a mix, it doesn't matter. Do Moogs have a value? Are they worth the money? I think they are. If you can afford them, they're worth the money. They're built so well. It's the Moogs and one other manufacturer are basically my standards by which I measure every synth I have. And Moog is, I'll get to the second one later. Moog is one of the two. When I'm touching a synth, turning knobs, playing keys, pressing buttons, Moogs are top tier, absolutely tied in first place for the best quality, build quality. All right, next, synth number 3. Okay, here's a shot of its filter knob. Here's a shot of its filter knob and a shot of its output jack. Put in the comments, what do you think this synth is? Let's see. Opinion number... Oh, here's one. Here's a question, not an opinion. Why don't all of this sort of YouTube synth community folk, right? All of the, all of them, the big ones, the little ones, things like that. There's never reviews of Nord synths, Clavia Nord synths. Now, is that because nobody owns them, or because they don't send them out for review, or a combination of both? What is that? I'm sad. So Nord is my other synth. Nords are tied with Moog in first place for build quality. They're frickin' built like tanks. Like the switches and the knobs on these things, they're like military aviation grade knobs and switches, rated to, 10 million clicks and 10 million turns. They're just amazing stuff. If you've got a favorite synth that, from Nord that you really like, I know the Nord leads have had a lot of popularity in the past, but they're sort of, the time is not being kind to, like the modular had a super huge following. Put a comment in about that. So this question. Let's see. Okay. So synth quiz question number 4. Here is the filter knob and here is the output jack. All right. Put that in the comment. What do you think it is? All right. Current favorite synth that I don't own. I am intrigued by the Udo Super 6, and I'm waiting to see if they do what they do next. One of the earliest synths I really loved was the Roland Juno 106, and the pedigree of that is very evident in the design of the Udo Super 6. You can tell there's a lot of influence there. I have a friend with one. I haven't laid my hands on it yet, but I've heard his live streams where he's using it. Gentleman goes by the name of The Entire Robot, link in the description. Just an amazing sounding synth, and I really want to get my hands on it, but I'm waiting because 6 voices, it's just a little limiting. I want more. So I'm sort of a polyphony nut. I want more. 4-voice synth, forget it. I'm never going to buy it. Anyway, so next one, synth quiz number 5. Here is the filter knob and the output jack. All right. Let's see. Current synth that I like the least. Anything with web keys on it. Anywhere the buttons are like, those web style. It's just a sheet of plastic with a bubble under it. I'm sorry. I don't know if that's IK Multimedia or Uno. I'm sure they're fine. I've never touched one. But I just remember the Timex Sinclair home computer from the 80s. That's how old I am. That was an experience that had a web-style keyboard, and I just, ever since then, I have hated the feel of those things. So, all right, next, synth quiz number 6. Here is a filter knob and an output jack. Okay, potentially similar to one you've seen earlier, right? So it could be synths in the same family. All right, next inflammatory synth opinion. DAWless versus DAWful. Yeah, I don't care. I'm sorry. I've been to shows where it was a DAWless set and it was boring because they just made a loop and then did variants on it. It was boring. It's hard to do like dramatic changes in a DAWless situation unless you're using a pretty powerful sequencer or set of sequencers. And my hat is off to people who work in a DAWless place and do significant changes in key or tempo or, emotional content. Like Take Me on a Journey. I like that. Generally in most DAWless settings that I've seen, the artists do 2 to 3 minute loops. It's a pattern. They build it up. They tear it down. Right. It's the transitions. Like the hard thing about going DAWless is getting the transitions right so that you change harmonically or your emotional content as you transition from one set of patterns into another one. It's almost like you have to have 2 DAWless rigs in sync next to each other, and you're actually just operating on one of them, working on a particular loop or pattern, and then you transition over to the next one that's got a completely different key or setup going on or a different feel. And sort of you crossfade between these 2 separate setups that are running in sync. I think that's why you see a lot of duos working, because while one person is getting everything rolling and doing the performance, the other part of the duo is listening on a back channel, basically prepping the next set of changes, and they are alternating back and forth. I think that's how it generally, on the more successful groups, is working. If you have opinions or experience there, let us know. Okay. Synth quiz number 7. Here is your filter, and here's the output jack. What do you think this one is? Going back, continuing the previous discussion, so DAWless versus DAWful. So I was talking about DAWless. So let's talk about DAWful, right? So that has its own set of problems where people say, oh yeah, I go to the concert so I can watch people just press play on a laptop. Yeah, whatever. That is true. Like, regardless of whether you use a DAW or not, you can fuck up the performance, right? You can make you can perform in a boring way, regardless of what hardware you've got, right? Unless you're making music using explosives and something like that. Yeah, welcome to the show. We're doing everything using an arc welder, and so anyway, from a DAW-full perspective. Right? It's a different workflow, a different sort of performance. But I don't think it's inherently better. I don't think it's inherently worse. It's just different because I completely swap back and forth between the two depending on what I'm doing. And so if you're in one camp, consider trying the other one. And if you're in a position where you can do it without necessarily selling everything you own, right? People like, I sold my computer and all of my monolithic synths to get into modular. It's like, oh, I've been there and I pity you. And then the reverse also happens. I sold all my modular to get into, I bought a huge computer and like every plugin available with the money from selling my modular. It's like, okay, if you do that, that's fine. We do what we can within our means. But baby steps. Consider taking baby steps. I have sold the majority of my modular and moved back to across the divide into sort of desktop and rack synths. I still have some semi-modular synths, and I still have a little box in my closet. Here's a picture of what remains of my modular gear. Some of it's on loan, some of it was sold, some of it was gifted. But take baby steps. You don't want to necessarily oscillate between Dallas and Doffel back and forth, selling everything each time you flip back to the other one. That's just a recipe for insanity and sadness and tears. So, okay, let's look at synth quiz number 8. Here is the filter knob, and here is the output jack. Let us know in the comments what you think that is. And with that, I think we're about done here. I could probably invent some more unpopular synth opinions to try and inflame the angry mob, but we'll save that for some future date. Thank you. I hope this has been entertaining, if not informative. We talked about how the studio is configured here to facilitate me being relatively lazy and never having to unwire anything ever. And just swapping out my control surfaces at the front of the desk, or when friends visit, we just patch things in through the patch bay. I highly recommend that workflow. It's super awesome. Or maybe you really get off on laying under your desk amidst cables and dust bunnies. That's fine. And then we've got the quiz here. I'm curious to see what people come up with. Thanks for watching. I appreciate the time you spend with me. And as always, you have been watching Synth Seeker. Have a great day.